Добрый день.
Good morning, everyone. I welcome you at the press center. Our weekly briefing is about to start. Taking into account that 2 days ago here we had a 3-hour-long conference by Foreign Minister Sergey Lavrov. He answered a great number of questions, and this is why today our briefing will probably be quite brief, if you know what I mean. The majority of questions were asked during the press conference of the minister, and the answers were given when it comes to the international agenda. As I understand, you have fewer questions, and I will also address fewer questions today. We will start from the announcement. On the 27th of January in Moscow, we'll host the traditional working lunch of Russian Foreign Minister Sergey Lavrov with ambassadors of CIS member states accredited in Russia. The meeting is also expected to be attended by CIS Secretary General Sergey Lavrov and heads of executive bodies of other Eurasian integration associations. The ministry is expected to summarize the results of multifaceted cooperation within this year in 2025, discuss with partners the priority areas of cooperation for the current year, and inform them about Russia's approaches to key issues on the international and regional agenda. Now we will address the international agenda, the topic that is of much interest recently and in the last years, and we had many questions from mass media and from citizens who asked us to give recommendations, which is the situation in Iran. We note with satisfaction the continued normalization of the situation in Iran, following the externally inspired unrest and acts of civil disobedience, financed, of course, that were recorded in the first days of the new year, and also inspired and financed from outside. The efforts of the authorities to ensure law and order, and very importantly, the marches of thousands of Iranian citizens in support of the constitutional order, sovereignty, and independence of the country, have thwarted destructive plans to destabilize the country. This fact had to be acknowledged, albeit with regret, by those hostile foreign forces that attempted to implement a color revolution scenario in the republic which they favor so much. The bloodshed on the streets of Iran is on their hands and conscience. We once again express our solidarity with the Iranian people, offer our sincere condolences to the families and friends of those who died, and wish a speedy recovery to those who were injured. We are in constant close contact with our Iranian partners who are sharing their assessments of the developing situation with us. We consistently advocate for de-escalation of tensions around Iran and in the region as a whole. We urge the parties involved to refrain from rash and reckless steps that would delay the prospect of a sustainable settlement of the situation in the interests of international and regional peace and security. We firmly believe that rejecting confrontational approaches and demonstrating a willingness to engage in mutual respect and equal dialogue would make it possible to reach a solution acceptable to all interested parties. We are ready to facilitate this in every way possible. Russian diplomatic missions in Iran are operating as usual, although the performance of certain consular functions is hampered by the lack of a stable internet connection. The recommendations to our compatriots remaining in the Islamic Republic of Iran remain unchanged. Take reasonable precautions, refrain from taking photos and videos, especially of military and government facilities, and strictly comply with the requirements of local law enforcement agencies and special services. We ask those Russians who have planned to travel to Iran for any reason to postpone their trip until the security situation has fully normalized. Now we will address Ukraine. The neo-Nazi regime in Kiev continues to attack civilian targets, terrorizing the peaceful population of Russia. Over the past week, 75 civilians have been affected by Ukrainian shelling and UAV strikes. Of these, 11 were killed and 64 wounded, including children. 3 children received injuries. Here are some concrete facts to confirm these words. Republic of Adygea, on the night of January 21, 11 civilians, including 2 children, were injured when a Ukrainian UAV struck a residential area in the Takhtamudaevsky district, causing a fire in an apartment building and a parking lot. Belgorod region, on January 15th, 3 civilians, including the head of the Malinovsky Rural Settlement Administration, Ignatov, were injured as a result of UAV strikes in the village of Malinovka and the village of Glotovo. On January 16th to January 20th, in the city of Shebekino, the villages of Nechaevka, Zibrovka, Tavrova, Golovchino-Gruskaya, Tradne, and Novaya Volzhanka, as well as on the Voznesenovka-Shebekino highway, drones killed 5 people, including Tailokov, assistant to the head of the Gravionsky district for security. 8 civilians were wounded. Bryansk region. On January 20th, 2 civilians were killed when enemy suicide drone struck a civilian vehicle in the village of Chosy. Zaporozhye. On January 19th, the armed forces of Ukraine shelled a secondary school in the city of Kamenka-Dnipropetrovsk, where 15 children and 10 employees were present at the time. Fortunately, they were not injured. On January 20th, a man was wounded in an attack by an unmanned aerial vehicle in Vasilievka, Krasnodar territory. On January 18th, a civilian was injured as a result of a Ukrainian armed forces strike on civilian targets in Tuapse. And on January 18th, 3 children aged 4 and an adult were injured when debris from a drowned Ukrainian drone fell in a residential building in Beslan. Three children were injured in this attack in Beslan. 3 children aged 4, 9, and 11. Can you imagine it? In Beslan, in North Ossetia, Alania, as well as an adult. Kherson region. On January 15th, 2 employees of the state pharmacy chain who were delivering vital medicines to a pharmacy in the city of Polokhy were killed by an enemy UAV attack on a civilian vehicle in the vicinity of the village of Basan on January 16th. By a drone on a private house in the village of Radans, a man was killed. On January 18th, in villages of Tavri and Vinogradovo, 2 civilians were injured by Ukrainian armed forces shelling. On January 19th, a man was killed by a UAV strike in the city of Alyoshki. According to the Investigative Committee of Russia, 445 people were killed and 553 were wounded as a result of the attacks in the Kursk region. The statistics presented by the Investigative Committee indicates this. Can you imagine? This is what the armed forces of Ukraine did there and what they do practically every day in different regions of our country against, I would like to reiterate, civilians, children, women, employees of the social field. They deliberately target them. Once again, according to the Investigative Committee information, in the Kursk region, 445 people were killed and 553 were wounded. The crimes of the Ukrainian nationalists are being thoroughly investigated, and all those responsible will be identified and will face inevitable punishment. With facts and with data, with actualized information, there will be a briefing by Ambassador at Large of the Foreign Ministry of Russia on the crimes of the Kiev regime, Rodion Miroshnik, on January 30th at 11 a.m. It will be held at the press center of the Russian Foreign Ministry and will be dedicated to the criminal acts of the Kiev regime in 2025. We will provide all the relevant information rapidly. We draw the attention of the international organizations. Rodion Miroshnik, in a week, will present a large report in the form of a briefing and speak on horrific trials civilians are going through due to Kiev regime's actions, deliberate actions, planned actions of the neo-Nazi Kiev regime. Summary statistics and facts will be presented, confirming the Kiev regime's systematic violations of the norms and principles of international humanitarian law, as well as testimonies from victims and other documentary and visual evidence of the terrorist nature of the regime of Zelensky. Sometimes my voice shakes when I have to speak on these actions taken against children, on the number of victims. We can see victims caused by the drones launched by Ukrainian armed forces. It is impossible to speak about this calmly. I do not know whether it is a secret or not, but the most difficult task when you voice these numbers and these facts is to see the text, because tears appear in the eyes, and it is difficult because they blur the vision, and sometimes I cannot refrain from these tears. But every time I try to do it so that the world can know that this Nazism that allegedly was defeated 80 years ago, once again it raises its head. Now it is hiding behind words about alleged democracy, freedom, allegedly national identity in Ukraine. In reality, this is nothing but a shadow, but a mask. This is just dust that is thrown in the eyes of everyone so that nobody can take note of the essence, the Nazi essence of what happens when for language, for nationality, people are being killed, people are being persecuted, and they do everything so that there is nothing left on the ground of those who they are fighting ideologically. In spite of the intolerable pain that the population, the people are suffering, that lose their relatives, bury their children, we still advance, and our law enforcement agencies, no matter how difficult it is, including from the psychological point of view, sometimes you think whether you need to apply the law, whether you need to follow the letter of the law. Sometimes there is a thought, maybe it would be easier to just engage in vengeance and put everyone under trial without thinking of law. But even so, overcoming this temptation, the agencies investigate, they pass the cases to the tribunals and courts, and then decisions are made. Russian law enforcement agencies continue to bring Ukrainian war criminals and foreign mercenaries to justice. The investigation into the case against the commander of the 138th Anti-Aircraft Missile Brigade of the Armed Forces of Ukraine has been completed. Nikolai Ziman, on January 25, 2024, 2 years ago, militants of the Kiev regime using the American Patriot air defense system over the Belgorod region shot down a Russian Air Force Il-76M aircraft. All the world was shocked. The number of Kiev regime crimes is countless, but this crime was very shocking for everyone, including in Ukraine. All those on board of the plane, 6 crew members, 65 Ukrainian prisoners of war who were being transported to the exchange point, and 3 officers accompanying them were killed. Nikolai Diman has been placed on an international wanted list. A criminal case has been sent to court against the head of the Yelizavetgrad, formerly Kirovograd detention center, Roman Chebanenko, who is accused of mistreating 18 Russian prisoners of war and intentionally causing serious harm to their health. From March to August of 2022, he also has been placed on the international wanted list. British mercenary Reginald Francis Steele, who participated in combat operation as part of the armed forces of Ukraine, has been sentenced in absentia to 13 years in prison. He has been placed on an international wanted list. This is the scale of crimes committed by Ukraine. On January 14th, during a press conference in Brussels, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen announced proposals to use a credit loan to Zelensky regime for 2026-2027. The amount is 90 billion euros in the form of a joint loan from EU countries. She proposed allocating 60 billion euros. Where do you think? No, it will not be allocated towards supporting democracy or rebuilding economy. Neither is it for the social sector. 60 billion euros will be sent to Kiev to address Kiev's military needs. As Ursula von der Leyen explained, Ukraine is at war with Russia, and they will spare no funds nor no money for this purpose. 30 billion euros will be assigned to the budget support of Kiev. What does that mean? A very interesting wording, budget support. Not the social field, not the economy field, not the construction of new plants, it is not about job creation. There will be no new schools opened or museums or theaters or universities. They will not have this money. This, according to Ursula von der Leyen, is money dedicated to the budgetary needs of the Kiev regime. What are these budgetary needs? We are well aware of what they are. The whole world knows. This money is assigned so the Zelensky can steal them, and this is what this is all about. Weapons should be purchased, according to her, mainly in Ukraine, EU countries, or the European Free Trade Area. The reasons are not hidden by her. This is a direct quote. This is a lot of money, said Ursula, and it should give us additional benefits in the form of job creation and strengthening our military-industrial base. Job creation with blood money. Job will be created at the expense of children, of people being killed. This is what these jobs, new jobs, will be about. The pragmatism of calculating Europeans is not a form of pragmatism, it is cynicism. And as noted in expert circles, it may negatively affect the interests of the Kiev regime, which previously asked sponsors to cover the budget deficit in 2026 of about $60 billion. The Kiev regime should not be given money. You should teach the Kiev regime to stop stealing, but it would be impossible because somebody is covering this thievery up. Now the Ukrainian treasury will only be able to receive 15 billion euros, even if additional tranches are received from other Western countries, the International Monetary Fund, or other sources of financing. Ukraine is unlikely to avoid a budget deficit amid an avalanche of rapidly growing needs to restore, for example, its energy sector. However, the dire situation of Vladimir Zelensky is of little interest to his European allies. For them, it is important to continue with the carnage and to participate in this redistribution of money.
And I would like to mention the visits to Ukraine by Western curators of the Kiev regime, who talk so much about peace, who have discussed peace so much. So let us see what they discussed there. On the 12th, 13th of January, Norway Foreign Minister Espen Barth Eide visited Ukraine. What do you think? Do you think he discussed peace? No, there were just other tranches for Ukraine to support its energy security and its vitality. Oslo is to allocate nearly 2 billion euro for this purpose. But Norway Foreign Minister forgets to mention that the jobs Ursula von der Leyen has promised to create in the EU countries. People who will work. They will work to produce munitions and arms from which this energy security and vitality of Ukraine, they will be destroyed by that, because it's the continuation of the slaughter. But the Westerners continue to ignore those logical chains. But the visit of the Norway foreign minister, it has other peculiarities. It was the inauguration of a replica of the Elstad runestone found on the territory of Norway, dedicated to a Viking who allegedly died in these places around the year 1000. Those were bold statements on historical topic. In his statements, he even mentioned the Vikings' journey through the territory of present-day Ukraine, supposedly reaching such cities as Dnipropetrovsk, Zaporozhye, and Kherson. Norway's foreign minister, he did not hesitate. He was not bothered by the fact that those cities were founded a little bit later. They were founded by the Russian Empire. And for some reason, Norwegian foreign minister, he did not mention that. He also did not mention that those cities were founded in the 18th century. Those pseudo-historical tales told by those Western Europeans. It's just vanity, neo-Nazi vanity of Bankova, in order to control them further. Just one question remains. This illiteracy of Espen Barth Eide is also the heritage of his ancestors, the Vikings, or what is that? The heritage of his ancestors who plundered, who killed people all over Europe, or is it something self-acquired? An attempt to embolden Ukrainians whom Europeans continue to convince of the need to further waste their human potential in the name of this illusory goal of allegedly inflicting strategic defeat on Russia. So let us discuss that in detail a little bit and maybe ask the Norwegian foreign minister this question. What rubbish was this, their foreign minister talking about in Ukraine, about Vikings and about those cities founded in Ukraine? Now on the 18th of January, Syrskyi, the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine, stated that soldiers who have returned from AWOL leave, they are tasked to the hottest sections of the front, from where they have nearly no chance to survive, to maintain their health, and it's not just strategic defense operation, but also offensive actions. He once again confirmed the true relation of the Zelensky regime to the Ukrainian population as to something expendable. But all those crimes of the Kiev regime against the Ukrainian people, experts, officials mention that politicians and all those specialists who are engaged in those issues, they have that neo-Nazi context. It's not just the Third Reich reincarnated by the Ukrainian armed forces, that not only the Ukrainian armed forces, but it's the ideology that is supported within the Ukrainian state at all the levels and stimulated. There is one more example. Yes, we regularly mention that the Kiev regime continues to promote anti-Russian ideology and countering the use of Russian language. That's what is allowing Bankova just to make its own citizens hate Russian language, Russians, and so on. In January, more Nazi remarks against Russian-speaking citizens were made by the so-called children's writer and activist Larisa Nitsoy. According to her, it's a quotation. Russian-speaking Ukrainians should be punished, persecuted, harassed, and not even allowed to open their mouths. That's what the children's writer, allegedly children's writer, said. As she said, let them be afraid to open their Moscow trashy mouths here in Ukraine, because it's not democracy, it's the vision of Putin's policy in Ukraine. End of quote. In general, she characterized the use of the Russian language as an anti-state action. Such a writer who hates her own compatriots. Children will not learn good things. She just took the place that was freed by Irina Farion. The most disgusting things about those cases with Farion and Nitsoy, it's just not their statements. People who are inadequate, who are mistaking. There are such people everywhere. Maybe people just not understanding what they're talking about. And crime is distinguished from a mistake, such a Nazi, such a moral crime. A mistake, it can be corrected. People can just say they were not right, just to correct themselves, to regret, but it's not just not a mistake. They think that everyone should think that way. This Nazi rubbish is just widely broadcast there in Ukraine. And no one thinks it's necessary to somehow explain or to feel some discomfort about such statements. No one bears responsibility. Maybe some misunderstandings, wrong quotations, wrong context. No, on the contrary. That's what is offered to white public as a norm, a new norm. And that's a testimony that their statements obviously totally coincide with this ideology promoted by the Bankova authorities. No one has corrected them. No one has brought them to responsibility. No one just apologized. No one qualified those statements as unworthy, illegal. No, on the contrary. Those people are applauded. And this bacchanalia surrounding the Russian language, Russian-speaking population, Russian-speaking culture in general, our common culture, this bacchanalia continues. It also covers monuments, as you know. Those beastly actions, they continue in Ukraine, erasing, distorting history. A monument to Soviet liberator soldiers has been dismantled in Vishneva in the Kiev region. A memorial plaque has been removed in Odessa. A memorial plaque to the writer Evgeny Petrov, co-author of the novels The 12 Chairs and The Little Golden Calf. The works known all over the Soviet Union. You remember about the adventures of Ostap Bender. There is no memorial plaque now. Why? Because his surname is Petrov or his name is Evgeny? We will add a link to the facts of his life in the text version of today's briefing. We will do that. In the town of Mykolaiv, they painted a memorial stone dedicated to soldiers who fell in battle against the Nazis in the colors of the Bandera flag. Just the literature heritage, their dirty hands, they reached, just think about it, Dostoevsky and Tolstoy, because their work contained elements glorifying Russia's imperial policy. It's a quote. It's just some beastly actions, manipulative, illiterate statement. And further memorial and geographical sites connected with the great Russian writers, they are regarded as manifestations of Russification policy and imperial propaganda, allegedly. Some horrible tales. They're just mentioning Dostoevsky. And all those places need to be renamed or monuments should be dismantled. So, will they rewrite those books by Tolstoy and Dostoevsky, or will they just burn them? These facts once again confirm the urgency of the tasks of denazification and demilitarization of Ukraine and the elimination of the threats from its territory, and all those goals, as repeatedly stated by the Russian officials, will certainly be achieved. On the situation in Moldova, they continue, under the pretext of non-existent Russian threat, to promote the idea of unification with Romania. Moldovan President Sandu, who has Romanian citizenship, she gave a new impetus to this campaign. On the 12th of January, she declared that a referendum will be held on this issue. But she can hold a referendum, of course. And as the Moldovan Foreign Minister Mikhail Popshoy mentioned, if the existence of the Moldovan state, its sovereignty, territorial integrity, and the lives and inviolability of its citizens were threatened, there is such possibility, reunification with Romania. And virtually all Moldovan top officials, they just spoke in favor of this unification with Romania. But common citizens, they were not asked whether they would like to preserve, as Popshoy mentioned, the inviolability of their lives by reunification with another state. This unionist campaign is generously seasoned with anti-Russian sauce. And I would like to remind about the period of the Romanian occupation of Bessarabia from 1918 to 1940. So, for To those who do not read books, to those who do not know, let me remind. Those were raids, arrests, torture and executions by the punitive apparatus. Those actions were taken against the Moldovans. It was commonplace. Ruthless exploitation and rapacious plunder of the region by Romania's ruling classes led to degradation of such traditional areas as livestock and agricultural production. Livestock numbers decreased by a third. Grain yields fell by more than 11% compared to 1906-1911 levels. Workers and peasants were deprived of their rights and freedoms. Child labor was exploited under the guise of apprenticeship. People's standard of living declined. Real wages in Chisinau in 1937 were 60% lower than in 1913. By 1940, two-thirds of peasant farms were ruined or were on the brink of ruin, on the brink of bankruptcy. It was just sovereignty, territorial integrity and inviolability ensured by Romania for the Moldovans. Outbreaks of disease, including tuberculosis, were recorded. Bessarabia had the highest mortality rate in Europe. It was just one complex of destruction of life in this region when those came to that region with whom Sandu is now offering to unite to the Moldovans. Office work and schooling were switched to the Romanian language. The church was Romanianized. The illiteracy rate exceeded 70% of the population because literate population, and cannot be told like that there has never existed the Moldovan language. There was only the Romanian language. Literate population understands its history and knows its culture, knows its roots, whether it's statehood or cultural common culture. The number of secondary schools was halved. That rate to this commonplace illiteracy. Fleeing brutal political terror, poverty and hunger, almost 500,000 natives were forced to leave their homeland. Of course, the Moldovan authorities prefer not to mention that. And do not talk about this tragic historical experience. But fortunately, the Moldovan people remember their history. Over 60% of respondents in opinion polls are against unification with Romania. So even like this, through total propaganda conducted by Sandu, with the use of Western money, she could not deprive the Moldovan citizens even with those means. Now about the transfer of around 1,500 tons of Russian wheat purchased through our country's contribution to the UN World Food Programme. It is 1,416 tons to be precise. Russian ambassador to Bolivia, Bolivia's Minister of Productive Development, head of the UN World Food Programme country office, participated in that transfer. The issue of food security is critical for Bolivia. The government of this country addressed Russia in August 2023, requesting food aid. And in accordance with the concept of the state policy of the Russian Federation to contribute to international development, that was adopted by the decree of the President of the Russian Federation, there was an additional contribution by our country to the UN World Food Programme. And the Bolivian side conducted a lot of organization and logistical work in order to transport this wheat to Bolivia. Russia has demonstrated that it is a reliable partner who can help in crisis situation, and La Paz thanked our country for humanitarian assistance. We are ready to continue our cooperation based on mutual respect for the benefit of our countries.
Previously, during our briefings, I gave you answers to various questions related to new crimes, something that has to do with the use of information technologies. I mean, cyber crimes, cyber fraud. Unfortunately, it is gaining momentum, and as an example, I gave you that in Southeastern Asia, and I promised to give you more details on that topic. We have started the information from the Minister of Interior, and in fact, I should say that it is surprising and it is bewildering. Over the last years, we saw that there are more and more fraud cases engaging foreigners and Russians as well. Similar cases were registered in Myanmar, Cambodia, and Thailand, using the instability of political situation in Thailand and China. Clandestine call center and online casino are established, as well as other forms of new criminal activity. Such illegal activity, including financial fraud and trafficking in human, becomes a serious challenge to countries where this fraud is operated, as well to its neighbors, but it is also a challenge for the region as a whole. Russians fall victim of this conventional scam through social media and messengers, and information is spread on the search of new employees in the territory of Thailand. For instance, they might need services of interpreters, translators, office managers, travel agents, or maybe representatives of a more creative professions with a higher wage. They present it as a high-profile job, someone who can offer linguistic services. Further on, these individuals are forced to participate in scams. They see no longer the documents. In November-December 2025, Myanmar authorities carried out a large-scale operation against various scam centers in their territory. As a result, something that is really shocking, as a result, over 10,000 illegal migrants were detained. On top of that, let's say a whole city or a small town was dismantled. It was home to all those criminals. Imagine 140 various houses or sites dismantled by a law enforcement agency. Similar crimes are widespread in Cambodia currently. Authorities of those states prioritize their fight against this type of crimes. Intense efforts are undertaken to prevent such crimes. Raids have been conducted on 118 sites. Approximately 5,000 individuals were detained and more than 4,000 were deported. According to the nationwide raids organized by Thai forces in October-November 2025, over 90 organizations were revealed engaged in internet fraud, and over 7,000 individuals were arrested. Can you imagine all those figures? 10,000 people or 7,000 people. Imagine how many people fell victims of those scammers. It is worth mentioning that against such backdrop, the number of Russian citizens participating in those scams remains rather negligent. Russian missions, diplomatic missions, and consular missions take appropriate measures to liberate their compatriots, those who fell victims. There is constant tight contact with law enforcement agencies of the country of state, with survivors and their families. Last September, Russia's embassy in Myanmar helped to liberate 2 of our citizens. All in all, approximately 20 compatriots were liberated by the efforts of our missions. Unfortunately, we have to say that some of our citizens prefer to join those criminal groups voluntarily. In this regard, I would like to call our citizens to be more vigilant. I would ask you to turn on your critical thinking while reading various job announcements. And of course, check all the information that you find. Ask for additional information inter alia through our diplomatic missions in those countries. What are the indicators, the suspicious indicators, so-called easy money, quick money, unreasonably high wages? In most countries of the region, foreigners need to have a working visa to work in a country and specific documents from the employer. It refers even to those states where Russian citizens do not need a visa. This is one of the major indicators, one of the red flags for you to see when you are offered a job in Southeastern Asia. If you're offered to work for a network of some organizations or offices, if they say they have an office in that country, and if they do not offer you any services, any assistance in getting a visa, when you are offered only travel documents and flight tickets, these should be a red flag for you. In most cases, it is a scam. Of course, we understand that Southeastern Asia is still a major country of resort for our citizens. Russians love spending their time there, but once again, stay vigilant. If you are offered a job in those countries, double check all the information through embassies of those countries in the territory of Russia or through Russia's embassies in those countries. But of course, do not forget about the Minister of Foreign Affairs here, where you can get a more detailed information. This testifies to the fact that the interaction between law enforcement agencies is also important, inter alia in the area of information and communication technologies. Russia has always been committed to fighting crime and cybercrimes as well. Our cooperation is always built upon mutual respect. Unfortunately, we face a situation when some Western states apply a selective approach to such cooperation, and they replace information security by current political architecture. After long discussions in Hanoi, a UN convention against cybercrime was signed. 74 states signed this document, 73 plus the European Union. The fight against crime is not a place for political competition. It is a liability which defines the security of citizens of all and every country. The Russian Federation is open for equal, pragmatic, depolitized cooperation with all interested states. The Hanoi Convention is only a starting point, not a finish line. And we call upon all the law enforcement communities to use legal and operational mechanisms and instruments, forget about double standards, and protect our citizens against shared threats in the 21st century. Only by pooling our efforts, by protecting our sovereignty and the international law, we will be able to ensure the defeat of the cross-border crime. For sure, it is the area when the cooperation, the interaction are not just beneficial but save real lives. Another important, not just topic, but I would say a page, a chapter in our history, something that we should never abandon, should never forget, something we should always feel for and never forget, those tragic days, nights, minutes, so that even the generations to come would remember that. That is the history that we delegate to our descendants. This is the living memory. As you know, on the 27th of January, every year we celebrate the Day of the Military Glory of Russia, the day of the full liberation of Leningrad from the Nazi siege. It is one of the most tragic chapters in our history, and to my mind, this is one of the most hideous chapters in the history of the world, because we are talking about a civilized community, civilized society. At that time, people knew what the international law is, what human rights mean, what are commitments, treaties. The siege of Leningrad during the Great Patriotic War for the Third Reich had a strategic importance. The order of the Hitler commandment was cut and clear: to keep the siege and to ensure the total extermination of its citizens. Barbarian bombardments and regular shellings, that was the practice carried out against civilians, hospitals, nativity hospitals, kindergarten, schools, museums, and palaces. The siege lasted 872 days, starting from the 8th September 1942 until the 27th of January 1944. Almost 900 days. Any liaison with the city was held only through the Lake of Ladoga and by air. It was the period of starvation, diseases, shellings. Over 1 million people died, including those who lived in the outskirts of the city. Scientists and activists are to be glorified here, because during those years and decades, on a daily basis, they do their best to restore the memory, and they keep looking for new names. It is not that we need to push statistics. It is about memory. No one is to be forgotten. As I said, it is an unprecedented tragedy. Soviet troops on many occasions tried to break the encirclement. On the 12th of January 1943, the troops of Leningrad and Volkhov France started a strategic offensive called Spark. On the 18th January 1943, the troops of the Red Army carried out a heroic deed. They broke the siege. Imagine a corridor of 8 to 10 kilometers. This narrow corridor allowed for the liaison to be restored, the liaison between Leningrad and the big land. It was a true tactic success. It ensured the delivery of foods, fuel. It allowed for the evacuation of injured and killed children. And the final defeat of the Nazi troops on the Neva River took place during the Leningrad-Novgorod operation, carried out between the 14th of January and the 1st of March 1944, organized by France of Leningrad, Volkhov, and the Second Baltic Front. On the 27th of January 1944, the siege was totally lifted. The heroic defense of the city became the symbol of courage of the Soviet people. By multiple privations, heroic deeds, and sacrifice, the warriors and the citizens of Leningrad not simply defended their city, industrial sites, houses. They defended the city as a part of the country. They defended the city as a part of the history. It was the symbol of the human integrity. At the time when many others, being in warm rooms, they lost their human faces. At that time, those who had no heating, those who had no liaison, those who had no idea of when their sufferings will be ended, those were those who gave their lives, their health, to prove that a human being can remain human even under the most unbearable circumstances. Perhaps this is the biggest exploit. This is a manifestation of heroic deeds for all of us. So they defended their city, and on the 22nd of December 1942, a medal was established for the defense of Leningrad. Approximately 1.5 million people were awarded this medal. On the 26th of January 1945, the city was awarded the Order of Lenin, and on the 1st of May 1945, the city has become a city hero. The Operation Spark made it possible to weaken the northwestern front of the enemy, and it became important for further liberation of Baltic states and the exit of Finland from the war. In 2022, on the request of Prosecutor General of Russia, St. Petersburg Tribunal recognized the actions by occupying authorities and German troops and their allies as a crime of war, crime against humanity, and genocide of national and ethnic groups. On many occasions, we touched upon this matter.
We have raised this issue many times, but let me reiterate. Germany continues to apply not only double standards when it comes to paying individual compensation to survivors of the siege of Leningrad, which claimed the lives of over 1 million Leningrad residents of various nationalities, and I would like to emphasize various. People did not divide themselves based on this principle. Instead of honoring their memory and assisting them however they can, simply because they made this heroic deed and saved the whole of humanity, instead of that, those survivors are once again reminded that by nationality they will be tried. This is a horrifying situation. Under far-fetched pretext, Germany pays compensation only to one single nationality, only to Jewish survivors, as if they wanted once again to revive this horrifying logic of segregation, and they refuse to extend those payments to other defenders and residents of the city who survived the blockade. I believe that this is an absolute shame for modern Germany, not only for its official authorities. I believe that this is a shame for all Germans who believe it possible to live with such an ideology. Those Germans who lower their eyes and tap their ears, believing that their personal comfortable life, calm and paced life, is more important than another atrocity committed by their German authorities. The Russian Foreign Ministry has repeatedly drawn public attention to this fact. I simply want to speak about the work carried out by our ministry. Appeals have been sent to the leadership of Jewish NGOs, calling on them to publicly condemn Germany's position. Assistance has been provided in preparing and distributing an open appeal to the German government on behalf of the blockade survivors, demanding that compensation be paid to all those who survived the blockade without distinction based on nationality, because this is not a matter of money. Survivors of the blockade receive full support from our state. This is not only about the principle of things. This is about a return to this horrifying logic of segregation, this criminal logic that led the world to the Second World War and became its literal driving force. On February 28, 2024, the Russian side sent a note to the German Foreign Ministry in which it officially raised the issue of recognizing the blockade of Leningrad and other crimes of the Nazi regime as genocide of the people of the USSR people during the Great Patriotic War, and also confirmed its position on the need to extend German individual payments to all blockade survivors currently alive. In a reply dated April 26, 2024, the German Foreign Ministry stated that Berlin's legal assessment of the blockade of Leningrad by German occupation forces and their allies in 1941-1944 as a war crime only and remains unchanged. Citing the USSR's refusal to receive reparations in 1953, demands for the payment of appropriate compensation to all survivors of the blockade, regardless of nationality, were also rejected. You know, Germany's rejection to extend payments to all blockade survivors without discrimination on the basis of nationality is shocking in light of the social benefits Germany has been paying for many decades to social benefits, as they call them, to former members of the Third Reich armed forces who served in SS units and other recognized criminal paramilitary structures, as well as to foreign collaborators of the Hitler regime who were directly involved in the blockade of Leningrad. Russian President Vladimir Putin, in his speech dedicated to the 80th anniversary of Victory Day, noted clearly that it is absolutely clear that the blockade of Leningrad ranks among such monstrous crimes against humanity as the Holocaust, death camps, and punitive actions by nationalist accomplices against civilians. In April 2025, the federal law on perpetuating the memory of the victims of the genocide of the Soviet people during the Great Patriotic War of 1941-1945 was adopted, and a new commemorative date, April 19th, was established as the Day of Remembrance for the victims of the genocide of the Soviet people committed by the Nazis and their accomplices during the war. Our rejection of Nazism is a key priority of historical memory. The uncompromising fight against any manifestations of neo-Nazism, xenophobia, and racial discrimination will continue in the name of protecting historical truth and perpetuating the memory of our citizens who fell victim to fascism and misanthropic ideology, for the sake of future generations, in the name of peace on earth. And you know, I would like to once again draw your attention. We spoke about it during our briefings, in our accounts, and at our conference in the Economic Forum in St. Petersburg. There are only a few days left till the 27th January left. There will be many stories on TV, on radio. Many will speak about the blockade of Leningrad. Find on the internet. It exists in an online format or in a text version. You can imprint it, for example, or read from your screens. The book by Irina Bulina, who, when she was a little girl, she survived the first year of the blockade. She did not only survive together with her family, she did not only preserve the memory about those horrifying events, she dedicated her whole life to perpetuating this memory and wrote a book dedicated to those horrifying days. Only 100 pages or a little more. They are very piercing. We will include in the text of our briefing the link. Read yourselves, read with your children. Read it in whatever format you want, but do read it. And another book also about an historical event. The Minister of Foreign Affairs throughout many years has been maintaining a constructive partnership with an organization that was founded in 1992, the Apostle Andrew of the First Cult Foundation, one of Russia's largest and most prominent public organizations. This cooperation is long-term and systematic in nature, and I would like to tell you about a unique project. As you know, after the 1917 revolution, Orthodox icons disappeared from the gate towers of the Moscow Kremlin. In our time, they were found and returned to their historical place. All these events are described in the book published by the foundation entitled Gateway Images of the Moscow Kremlin Towers. It is dedicated to the history of the unique gateway images of the Spasskaya, Nikolskaya, Troitskaya, Borovitskaya, and Kutafya towers of the Moscow Kremlin. The publication reveals the centuries-old tradition of creating and placing gate images. It is known as a symbol, as a unique piece of architecture, as the center of Russia. That is the Moscow Kremlin. This is another piece of its history, which I believe is very interesting, including to foreigners, and particular attention is paid to historical and archival research, which for the first time cover in such detail the history of the images from the 16th century to the beginnings of the 20th century, as well as their return and restoration at the beginning of the 21st century. The book was presented in 2025 at the Andrei Rublev Central Museum of Old Russian Culture and Art. At the moment, on the initiative of the foundation, the possibility of sending the book Gateway Images of the Moscow Kremlin Towers to the libraries of Russian embassies and diplomatic missions abroad is being considered. And now I am ready to answer your questions. Do we have Международная жизнь here? Good afternoon. The Davos Forum is underway, and the President of France, Emmanuel Macron, spoke about a shift towards a world without rules. A shift towards a world without rules where the international law is substituted and only the law of the strong is in effect, said Macron, and also spoke about the manifestation of empiric ambitions. How could you comment upon this? You know, this is about the magic glasses used by Emmanuel Macron, which he used at Davos during his speech. I believe he used those glasses, and now everything was clear for him. He realized what we have been speaking about for a long time, that all those rules invented by the West to substitute international law come down to one single rule, the right of the powerful. This is precisely what we speak about. And he used those same words to characterize the neocolonialism, which used to take different forms. It came from colonialism. This is all about different ambitions of the countries. And another question. I would like to hear your comment upon the content of the Sweden report and Russia's influence in Finland in 2025. We have taken note of the document. It was published in December 2025 by a well-known Russophobe Oxenen who specializes in this anti-Russian propaganda. Of course, this is an horrific work. It is an example of historic revision and substitution of true analysis. Instead of a scientific research and analysis, they use, as they like to say, these propaganda narratives. This is not even a manual or reference book. This should be something easy to read and short, soon forgotten. But here they have a very well thought out work full of those rhetoric figures that they like to use for propaganda. And it is not harmless for local communities and states because there is a historic substitution of the truth. It is not a simple revision, but a rewriting of history. They justify the cooperation of Helsinki with Nazi Germany. Is that something good for the people of Finland? Of course it is not. They deny that Finland participated in the blockade of Leningrad. They whitewash the crimes in the USSR in Karelia by them. We spoke a lot about that. The author of the work is speaking about the unacceptability to equalize the camps in Karelia to Nazi camps. Do you know why? Because there were no gas furnaces there, because according to the author, if there are no gas furnaces, in that case, the camp cannot be considered a Nazi camp. It seems to be some kind of another camp according to them. They deny aggregation of people and the high rates of mortality. They also deny this fact. They deny hunger, disease, forceful deportation as evidence of the large-scale campaign of influence against Finland. By the way, he is an author from Sweden, not from Finland. As evidence, well, he references the decision of the High Court of Karelia about recognizing Finland responsible for genocide in Karelia, and the decision was based on irrefutable evidence of atrocities committed by Finland and their being accomplices to Nazis. All this can be characterized as petty attempts to rewrite history. And the most horrific thing is that they are trying to cover up the dark pages of history. In the history of Finland, they try to cover up the facts of Finland's involvement in the actions of Nazi Germany, the atrocities committed during the occupation of Karelia and the region of Leningrad. This is something irrefutable. This is evidence that we have in facts, and the facts cannot be denied. He also presents the idea of the so-called Russian threat. How can they be justified? There is nothing. He has no data that could corroborate it. The facts that have been known for decades about the atrocities committed by Finland leadership of the time still remain, but he remains blind to them and does not include or reference them in his work. I would like to once again state that Russia will not permit to falsify history, irresponsibly demonize our country, regardless of the historic period in question, and first and foremost, when it comes to the Great Patriotic War, every time such an attack is produced, we will respond. Thank you. And do we have RIA Novosti? Good afternoon, RIA Novosti. Christina Lona Rodriguez. We have two questions. First question. The mayor of the second biggest city of Armenia, Gyumri, Gukasyan, who is in custody, recently sent a petition to Lavrov. Do you have any kind of comment on the issue? Indeed, I do have. At the press conference that I believe you started with your question 2 days ago on January 20th, Foreign Minister Lavrov provided a detailed comment. He said that the detention of the mayor of Gyumri, caused, among other things, by his statements regarding the accession of Armenia to the United States, Russia, and Belarus, are cause for confusion and puzzlement. It was a very high-profile case in Russian communities, especially among those people who worry for relations between Russia and Armenia, and these concerns are justified because some have familiar ties to Armenia, some have enterprises, some have invested funds. The so-called political accusations recently have been lifted from Gukasyan. Nevertheless, criminal persecution for statements in favor of strengthening ties with traditional allies are absurd from the start. And I would like to emphasize that Russia has always spoken in favor of Armenia being a sovereign, independent, prosperous state. This is this is a good thing, and how can anyone not see it? Russia not only through words shows this approach. We make concrete steps based on our political logic and will. Some Russian parliamentaries are also worried about news of deteriorating health of the illegally accused for political reasons. Accusation which has now been lifted, and legally elected mayor of the city, Gyumri, who still remains in custody. Interestingly, from Armenian side, we see a reaction that is very different to the practice that we sometimes see when these remarks and situations are disregarded. In Armenia, we also have never heard about the use of any legal tools or other illegal actions that call upon joining the EU. Against them, no actions are taken. In this case, everything is normal, so it seems that there is also a kind of a segregation based on nationality. When it comes to the European Union and any involvement in its policy, it indeed is related to a rejection of a part of a country's sovereignty, and such approach would be covered by one of the articles of the Criminal Code of Armenia. In that case, such cases also should be analyzed and addressed, because there are some people who push for Armenia joining the EU and push for it giving up a part of its sovereignty. Let us look at what is happening inside the European Union, how countries cannot defend neither their individual rights or interests nor collective rights. How can it be called sovereignty when effectively they are being forced into joining the ranks of those marching towards a brink, a catastrophe, and they call this general policy of solidarity of the European Union. People who do not wish to advance towards that direction are being named dissidents and are called people who do not have a policy that aligns with the policy of Brussels, and measures are taken against them. In Hungary, in Poland, we can see such examples. They tried to defend their national interests, and what did they receive in turn? Sanctions, decisions that discriminated against them, literally a punishment for not fulfilling the orders of the collective Brussels.
That's it. That's the refusal of sovereignty when a country is made to act against its national interests. Just not made, just made to give priority to collective interests and refusing to protect its own interests if this Brussels collective unconscious does not allow that. And convincing it that the interests of some specific country are not worth being protected. And my second question, I would like to know whether there is some news about Russian Marines from Marinera oil tanker detained in the US. Yes, I would like to remind you that this question was asked during the press conference, and Sergey Lavrov has answered this question, but 2 days have passed. Not only 2 days, but quite a lot of time since the Russian side received a request, made a request to President Trump about the releasing the crew of Marinera oil tanker detained in North Atlantics. Very disappointed about this prolonged pause in the settlement of very important and urgent issue for us, and we hope that in the near future it will happen and our citizens will be able to come back to their motherland. Actually, it's even impossible to imagine that there is some authority that is subordinate to the American president that does not comply with his decisions. Actually, consciously does not comply, and for a long time. Thank you very much. Thank you. Is Radio Sputnik Georgia with us? Yes, hello, Madam Zakharova. Sputnik Georgia is here. We have such a question. What is your characteristics of the current situation and relations between Russia and Georgia? On one hand, the economic cooperation is developing very successfully, and everything that is necessary is done, but there are no official contacts between Russia and Georgia. Actually, there have been declarations about readiness to protect their own interests for Georgia, but not the path offered according to the Ukrainian and Moldovan scenario. They do not want to sever ties with Russia because thanks to this cooperation, this interaction, the Republic demonstrates record rates of GDP growth and growth of incomes. So they just beginning to recognize the illusory nature of joining NATO, these false promises. And they have some realistic assessments about how they are tried to be deceived. We would like Georgia to be sovereign, to be independent, and not an instrument, a tool in someone else's hands, a toy in someone else's hands. We understand the Georgian authorities' policy of limiting external interference in the country's internal affairs, which has reached an unimaginable scale and form in recent years. Our relations are pragmatic, it's neighborhood as well as spiritual unity. We note that there are steps to protect the traditional values and foundations of Georgian society from neoliberal policies. which aim to erode Georgian national identity. Our economic cooperation is growing. For example, in 2025, the trade turnover increased by 6%, reaching $2.7 billion. Russia, by a wide margin, is actually a single market for Georgia. The number of tourists, Russian tourists to Georgia increased by 11% last year, reaching more than 1.5 million people, actually 1.6 million people. And Russia in this sphere for Georgia is a priority tourist partner. As for resuming political dialogue with Tbilisi, unfortunately, alas, so far, actually, even during the Saakashvili regime, it was decided that severing diplomatic relations and refusing to hold conversations with Russia that would help resolve certain issues. That was not our choice. Those were dialogues back then of those people. The absurdity of such an approach is obvious. It is obvious now. In Georgia, many politicians and many citizens understand that dialogue is a key to the prosperity of everyone. And there are facts that confirm this. Thank you very much, Madam Zakharova. Actually, I will never forget. I have not seen it by myself, but I saw the footage made and published in mass media outlets. Someone filmed them from a telephone by private cameras, how that flight, the first flight for many years, that was renewed, air communication. And how the people, they were so glad that this air communication has been renewed. They were glad not only because they have succeeded in creating some high-profit financial project. They were glad because common sense, it was obvious. Because families, friends, they have received the possibility to communicate without some extra flights, but direct flights. And I just remember those emotions of joy. Frankly speaking, this specific example, you could see how justice prevailed, and these evil acts they were conquered by good wishes. And it was just frank joy. They did it not only for themselves, but they have done it for the people who actually, on both sides of the border, they did not feel those borders because, for example, they were members of one family. Thank you. Thank you. Is Bolt News with us? Yes, hello, Madam Zakharova. We have two questions today. The US is the main strategic ally of Baltic states that is fixed in the foreign policy documents of this countries, but during the second presidential term of Donald Trump, they started to undermine his plans also on Ukrainian settlement, to contradict his claims regarding Greenland. Will that influence somehow lead to the end of American-Baltic partnership? Will that lead to transformation of Baltic political regimes? And what will the changes be? Actually, those regimes, the ruling Baltic regimes, are built in accordance with just one principle. Just one principle remains there, not only just loyalty to the West. It's not just national interest, but it's Russophobia. those who have passed the test, they have some chance to occupy some high post. For which time it doesn't matter, but the main thing is just to adhere to this principle of hatred to Russia, to Russian people and so on. It's mainly against these common citizens of these countries, but it's just Russophobia, this blatant hatred. And the majority of initiatives are aimed at escalation of contradictions with our country. They do that because they are ready, and they support Russophobia, as I have already said, but they retranslate someone else's will under the disguise of their own will. There are no constructive statements made by Baltic governments, no constructive actions. They will just aim at confrontation with us, continue that. There are no prerequisites and the reasons for that. That's just how the system there exists. Some positive changes can only occur if the ruling elites change. Some pragmatic forces emerge and understanding the mutual benefit of cooperation with Russia. Second question. During his speech at the ambassadors' meeting, French President Emmanuel Macron called Russia a destabilizing power. How do you assess such statements by the French leader? Yes, actually, you can check that. Maybe he said it when he took off his glasses, his magic glasses that helped him see the truth in Davos. It's actually not the first just empty and irresponsible remark regarding our country. No one should make such statements about our country, neither Macron nor anyone else. It's impossible. But before that, he made statements earlier. He called our country existential threat to France and all of Europe, a destabilizing force. He even called our country a predator at the gates, a cannibal. And I have just one question. Where are the gates? Which gates? I do not know. Maybe he heard about some common border between us. I have not heard about that so far, but maybe he knows something. I wanted to say that on many occasions he formulated it as a powerhouse destabilizing international situation around our country. He just invented it. Regarding those accusations in destabilizing the international situation, what has happened in the world now after that? How can something like that be expressed? It was just some sick fantasy regarding our country. Now it's just a sick fantasy. Lack of vision of what is happening in the world and realistic assessment of the processes that are underway. And that's an attempt to keep silent about his own mistakes. The deep fundamental crisis in European security and many global processes. It's ignoring our country's fundamental interests for decades, contrary to their promises expansion of NATO, supporting the coup in Kiev and supporting it not on one occasion. Turning Ukraine into anti-Russian stronghold and inventing this global order based on some rules. It's just the right of the law of the strong, and it's destabilizing force, a predator, a cannibal. destabilizing international security, and so on and so forth. It is noteworthy that at the same time the French authorities have begun to talk about resuming contacts, but with whom? With a predator, a cannibal, a destabilizer. But then why? If such characteristics are pronounced about us, why? In order to impose unacceptable conditions on us, conditions for resolving the Ukrainian crisis, in order to convince us to accept the deployment of a coalition of the willing troops in Ukraine. It's just some insane idea. It's just doomed to fail. So we see no preconditions for the normalization of bilateral relations with France. And because of Paris, those relations have fallen into a deplorable state. But the current ambassador of France in Moscow, it will be a good idea for him to work on that issue and to report to his capital that all those statements, those insane statements, are not fashionable, no longer fashionable, and do not correspond with the current situation. Thank you. Thank you. Is China Media Corporation with us? Yes, hello, Madam Zakharova. We have two questions today. According to the State Statistics Directorate of China, in 2025, China economy grew by 5%. GDP exceeded 140 trillion yuan. Personal income increased, and China is among the top 10 nations on the development potential, innovation potential. How do you assess this China's economic development, and how could that affect our cooperation? We're glad about the success of Chinese people and this Chinese economic miracle. It continues to surprise the entire world. Someone is actually surprised, and it's a wonder for someone, but someone is frightened, seeing some destructive emotions and reactions. China remains a driving force for global growth, and it is aware of its responsibility in international affairs. Russia and China are among the economic powerhouses globally, and our relations are strong, reliable, adaptable in the current conditions. And talking about our country, it has been a lot of pressure, illegitimate sanctions that are actually part of a hybrid war against our country by the West. That has all become possible. The achievements of our country are also due to unprecedented level of trust and interaction. The common principles of equality and mutual respect, and the readiness to cooperate in economy and trade. And an important factor is possibility for innovation. In this connection, we give a lot of importance to the links between China and Russia in different areas like atomic energy, outer space, and there are mega science class projects, new opportunities for our students and scientists, the growth in number of common scientific research, and the growth in interaction will give a powerful impetus to the development of both countries and help ensure their technological sovereignty. Thank you very much. Our second question is about the issue that has been widely discussed recently. Sergey Lavrov mentioned it during the press conference. You mentioned it during your briefings on many occasions.
Of the last years, we heard a lot that there are some contradictions between the US and European states. It refers to diplomatic trade disputes over Greenland, and some clashes keep growing. So, facing such a strong reaction from European states in the US claim on Greenland. The American leader also stressed that the world will not be in full security unless the US gets total control over Greenland. What is the Russian stance here, and how would you assess such an American move and its impact on the current political, economic, global world order and relations with the NATO allies? Let me once again quote Minister Lavrov. He said that we have no say here and we keep observing the situation and we will make our conclusions based on the solutions of this situation. Once again, let me stress that here Russian and Chinese approaches here coincide because publicly and openly we asked not to drag us into this situation. We should not be associated or tainted anyhow by such situation. We have nothing to do with what is going on over Greenland. Thank you. Ratos, are you with us? Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. Here I am, and here is my question. It has to do with the START Treaty, which expires at the beginning of February. Last year, President Putin offered the US to extend the restrictions for another year, but Washington did not answer yet. At the annual press conference, the foreign minister of Russia pointed out that there are no specific contacts on this matter between Russia and the US. I mean experts at the expert level. At the same time, there are no contacts relating to the expiring restrictions. Let me jump in. Basically, nothing changed over these 2 days since the press conference. So, given that the START Treaty expires, what is Russian assessment of the risks if the treaty expires? How high these risks are? And if there is no treaty, how could we minimize them? Well, as of today, we are still uncertain about the future of the treaty. Russia didn't receive any answer from the US, no answer to our initiative on the post-START era, which was initiated by the Russian president last September. What we have are only statements made by Trump, rather speculative statements, sometimes controversial. As Sergey Lavrov, who you quoted, already said during his press conference, the latest comment given by the American leader can hardly be called promising. It is not yet clear whether this is the last word pronounced by Washington. So, I address you to the Article 1. No additional information was received. We still have a couple of weeks until the 5th of February, when the treaty expires. We prefer not to make any abusive forecasts before that. We prefer to wait until this date comes. Only then we will be able to make conclusions and to have arguments to make statements. Let me also remind you that the President of the Russian Federation said that Russia is ready for any scenario. Thank you. Newsroom, are you with us? Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. Switzerland and Davos, for another year, welcomes the meeting of the World Economic Forum. This year, the Russian delegation is headed by Kirill Dmitriev. Is there any importance in this Davos platform for relations with Moscow? Well, I believe that you have the possibility to get direct comments from those who are involved in negotiations, or rather who hold contacts. You can hear comments from those who are present in Davos. I see no reason in giving additional comments on that matter. As for the Davos Forum, to my mind, they deviated a lot from the economic nature of the forum. Everything has been mingled, and currently what we see is a chaotic discussion of political issues. I wouldn't even call them geopolitical, rather narrow political matters. The forum used to be a platform to discuss global economic matters, but what we see today, it is a purely politicized platform. I would say that this is the best word I can use here, politicized platform. Apparently, this year's event is no exception. It is not the economic agenda, but rather a political agenda that prevails. The matters surrounding Ukraine, Gaza, Iran, Venezuela, and Greenland. And the matters on the agenda and the nature of the discussions is another proof of exceptional Western orientation of this forum. But I think that you know that organizers prefer not to invite officials from the Russian Federation. Given the chaotic nature of the debates that we observe today from Davos, I'm looking forward to the Munich conference on security issues. I believe it will be funny to hear from them the same as from Davos. Thank you. See, who are you with us? Basically, you already gave an answer to the question asked by my colleague, so it means that I have no questions. Big Asia, are you with us? Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. Speaking about cohesion within the CIS, can you say a few words about the creation of the International Russian Language Organization, which was established in 2023 on the Kazakh initiative? What will be the role of such an international structure in the context of strengthening cohesion and unity of CIS? On many occasions, we touched upon this matter. You know that the CIS undertakes lots of measures to strengthen the Russian language as a certain key to treasure of global culture, literature, science, and education. And basically, the International Russian Language Organization is meant to become one of the underlying instruments in this area. It was established by Russia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan on the initiative of the Kazakh president Kassym-Jomart Tokayev. The treaty entered into force for all the signatories, a package of operational financial documents necessary for the operational activity of the International Russian Language Organization was adopted. National representatives were appointed from Russia. This is Mr. Lavrov at the ministerial level and his deputy Alexander Pankin. Preparatory work is in the making for the organization of the ministerial conference. This organization is meant to become an intergovernmental structure with the international legal status. It naturally fits into the system of existing integrational unities in the CIS space. This organization is open for all states to join, including those who are not members of the CIS. It is open to all those who are interested in cooperating with it, for those who share its noble goal of strengthening multilateral cooperation in supporting and promoting the Russian language based on the principles of friendship, neighborhood, interstate cohesion, confidence, and mutual understanding. Thank you. Do we have the voice of Homeland? I double-checked right before the briefing. All the questions that we received will be answered, and as I was informed, all the questions have received their answers. If it is not the case, please inform me. Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. Here is my question. Against the backdrop of recent statements by the Western representatives who want to make a deal as it was with Virginian Islands, at the same time they keep pushing the creation of a so-called Council of the World, representatives as some kind of alternative to the United Nations. Don't you think that it is a manifestation of hypocrisy? It is not about building a just world, but about replacing the international law underpinned by the UN Charter, but something else where sovereignty is a bargaining chip. Well, I believe that you followed the statements made by the Russian president when the Minister of Foreign Affairs was mandated to study the initiative that you mentioned. What I might say is that we are working on that. When all the instructions are fulfilled, when the initiative has been studied, then we will be able to give you detailed comments of whether it will be the foreign ministry or the presidential administration who will give you comments. This decision will be made further on. Thank you. And my second question. How would you assess the decision of Moldovan authorities who operate on orders from Brussels and Washington to leave the CIS Charter? Because we see that this is the Western plan to cut off Moldova from Russia, from CIS, to cut its historic, cultural, and economic ties with our state. What comment could you give? And what are our intentions in terms of ensuring the rights of Russian-speaking citizens? How do we plan to fight against discrimination and ensure security and safety of Transnistrian citizens, those who might suffer full blockade? Well, it is not Russia which is being pushed away, but these are Moldovians themselves who are chased from their historic homeland. And here, I do not hear the question mark. It seems to be obvious to everyone. Moldovan citizens are considered only as potential Romanians if they agree to change their citizenship, nationality, ethnicity, or they are considered as those who are not welcomed at home because such home does not exist. No one is willing to conserve this home. It seems as if this home is a bargaining chip, something which is being sold for free to those who come to this house, come to this home, but historically they did nothing but chaos. This is something that I said many times today. One more thing. It is not about us, about our dialogue, your questions and my answers, but this is about comments and statements made by Moldovians themselves they try to do their best to bring the message home that Moldovians themselves are being pushed away and chased from their own land. Their rights are violated. Once again, it is not a legal assessment, but this is the image which fits perfectly the current situation. We see elements of genocide, of genocidal policy against own population. Either you become a Romanian or your rights will be violating. What else could you call it when you face a choice, either becoming a Romanian and speaking the Romanian language, or your rights will be violated? These are intolerable, unbearable conditions that are created for the population. It becomes impossible to go on with traditions, with the way of life that people are used to. No normal life is any longer possible. Even the use of the language now is not easy. Of course, all those elements could be called genocidal. Once again, let me stress, I'm talking about Moldovians as natives in their own country. And thoughtful politicians give such assessments to the current situation in the country. I believe it is obvious who is interested in that. We can hear about that in Bucharest, in Brussels. Today, Chisinau announced that Moldova is about to leave 3 underlying treaties within the CIS. But there is a whole packet of documents in various areas, including humanitarian. I see no direct link between the participation of a state in the CIS and protection of rights and interests of our compatriots. That is what is our priority. That is what we do in any country, including Moldova. On multiple occasions, we stated facts of discrimination against Russian-speaking citizens on both boards of Dniester, among them oppression to Russian-speaking media, to all those who show Russian passports. And Moldovan authorities did not need to officially leave the CIS to do that. But we are committed to asking those questions at all international platforms, including the UN, the OSCE. Basically, they have all it takes even today. What lacks is the appropriate reaction. They are willing to neglect the existing facts, to switch on so-called white noise. Chisinau remains a member of various conventions and recognizes that human rights violations are a source of legitimate concern for other states and entities. As for the blockade of Transnistria, that's another story. We are convinced that any pressure, including economic, makes no sense, and we are committed to countering such scenario. Thank you very much. Have a nice day.
Do you have authority with us? Good afternoon. Thank you for providing a detailed comment on the topic of criminal cybercrime. And thank you for the wording that you used about the magic glasses used by Macron. Well, as you can see, those glasses did help him see. So the problem was with the glasses. We need to ask him where he bought him. Well, perhaps it was not about the glasses, but there are different variants. Are Russian contacts still effective with Interpol? Is it true that the EU and the US at present completely disregard any request from Russia about extradition or detention of criminals that hide from criminal responsibility outside of Russia? Could you repeat? Is it true that EU and the US ignore any request from Russia about extradition of criminals or detention of criminals who hide from criminal responsibility outside the territory of the Russian Federation? What countries in particular are we talking about? Well, perhaps I used the wrong wording. I will try to say it in another way. To what extent are the contacts between Russian agencies still effective with the international policy organization of Interpol, and whether the EU and the US ignore requests that come from Russia when it comes to extradition? Indeed, there is a problem here. As you know, issues of interaction with the Interpol are dealt with by the Ministry of Interior of our country, and of course we are in contact with our colleagues, and in various occasions we spoke about the fact that Europe, in essence, torpedoed in many international platforms normal cooperation and interaction. Unfortunately, Interpol was not an exception. This organization should be depoliticized. How can you enforce the law if for that you need to first understand the position of somebody, for example, in Ukraine, or matters that have nothing to do? But for some reason, this is the approach utilized by the EU in many international specialized bodies. They feel that a priority for them is the politicization to the absurd. We have taken note of that problem, and we have drawn the attention of our colleagues to the problem in those organizations. We have drawn their attention to the fact that they themselves would suffer from unfulfilling the commitments of the organization in law enforcement, the search for criminals and prevention of crimes that are transnational. First and foremost, would correspond to their own interests, and if those obligations are not fulfilled, and that if crimes are not prevented, if the criminals are not caught, then it would affect painfully everybody, including them. Perhaps something from our warnings have reached them, and a solution was made. Other problems remain. We'll prepare detailed material on the matter. And the second question, we have seen that in media outlets there are a lot of stories about customs officers regularly detaining foreigners that come to our country, and our question is related to this. Foreigners say that they were unaware of those rules. We would like to get to the bottom of this and see if it is about custom officers fulfilling their obligations in such a way, or it is about foreigners becoming too careless because they do not have to deal often with custom regulations. We would like to hear a comment from you so we can see what happens in reality. Well, this question is more in the purview of the Federal Customs Service of Russia, but with them we also maintain contacts. As you rightly say, this question is related to the stay of our citizens abroad, of foreigners stay in our country. So we maintain contacts with the agencies, head agencies involved. We work together. And indeed, the Federal Customs Service confirmed that recently there was a growth in the number of violations of the customs legislation of the Russian Federation and rules of the Eurasian Economic Union by foreigners. Surprisingly, this happens not only to tourists but also to foreign embassies and consulates employees, including trade missions and representatives of foreign state organs and international organizations. These our purviews cross, and it is surprising that diplomats also are affected because they should be able to observe the laws and rules of their country of stay. As we are informed by our colleagues from the Federal Customs Service, this mostly happens when they are moving through Russian airports. I believe that the root cause is that foreigners are not sufficiently informed of the norms and rules of customs regulations. In order to provide more detailed information to foreigners at the official website of the Federal Customs Service of Russia, reference information was published. A link will be available in the text version of today's briefing. As you know, we translate all our briefings into foreign languages, and we will distribute this information also in the websites of our embassies and missions abroad. As I understand it, our colleagues from the FCS have prepared a detailed brochure, traveler's guide with images which shows in detail what regulations exist, what rules are in place when importing goods, when crossing the border, when entering and exiting Russia. There is a clarification for the principles of applying the system of green and red customs corridors. This information, as I have stated, is available in Russian and in English language. And we will also publish it on the websites of our embassies and missions abroad, so you can get acquainted with this information. And I would like to address foreign embassies accredited in Russia and tell you that the Federal Customs Service is ready to organize a specialized learning event in the field of customs regulation norms for diplomats and other categories of foreigners if there is such a collective initiative. And I believe that we will be later informing also the embassies as part of our interchange of diplomatic notes. Thank you. If we have no further questions, I would like to bid you farewell till our next meeting.